Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we review books of every genre, looking for the best of fun escapist books. Today we're doing a children's book, The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. And this is a fairly thick book for a juvenile fiction or young adult, but it's because it is full of illustrations, which I'll get to in a second. It is probably a book that is appropriate for ages 8 to 14. So the young adult, older child, elementary, middle school age kid would probably be totally fine reading this. Obviously it's pretty thick, so handing this to a child, they have to be a really voracious reader to even want to open it up, because they'd be like very intimidated by how big this is. I read this to both my kids who are upper elementary age. It is a historical fiction. It feels like it should be a fantasy adventure, but it's not. There's nothing in here that is unrealistic, although it is fiction. The characters aren't real people for the most part, but it does deal with actual historical events in real historical locations. So it is historical fiction. Okay. The plot. So the plot is that a boy named Hugo Cabret is apprenticed to a train station timekeeper. So the timekeeper is supposed to go around and make sure all the clocks in the train station are wound, that they're keeping the correct time. So it's kind of a daily, twice daily, you go around to a whole bunch of clocks. And Hugo Cabret's uncle, who he was apprenticed to, dies, so he's left by himself. And by himself, he tries to keep on top of doing the clocks, because that's all he knows to do. But he can't figure out how to cash his uncle's paychecks, so he kind of is a thief. And there's no adult, so he, is grubby and doesn't have a haircut, and, he kind of looks like a street urchin. And he stumbles across an automation, is what he calls it, which is a clockwork man that is broken. And he has always been obsessed with clockworks, gears, clocks, that kind of thing, so he takes it home to fix it. He thinks it's going to have a message from his father on it. And so he starts fixing it. And in the process, he discovers a whole history of a person that's a real life figure called Mr. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Méliès. It's the guy who made what is considered one of the first science fiction films in existence, one of the first narrative films ever created, which was A Trip to the Moon. So it's kind of a little bit about that gentleman as well. Okay, so that's kind of an overall of the plot, and there will be some minor spoilers about this. So let's first talk about the plot, because this was something that I liked and my kids liked. It was engaging, it was interesting. We have a boy that is on his own, which there are a lot of children's books that are like that. Kids tend to like that independent child that is surviving on their own. A fantasy for most kids to be able to be like, I could do it all by myself, and it's unrealistic, but it's fun. And he also has a really interesting world that he lives in. So he lives in the train station, in the walls of the train station, like there are hidden tunnels and stuff, which again, kids love. So the world building around it is really very appealing to children. You have an independent kid living in a fantasy world, basically, even though it has nothing magical about it. He also has lots of clockwork stuff to deal with, which kids, again, that's his very exotic feeling. Kids really like that. Again, coming back to our plot, it has a lot of mystery involved in it. What is up with the automation? What is up with the people? What is up with the circumstances? How is this going to resolve? There's kind of a bit of a mystery, because the automation that he finds is supposed to draw a picture, and the picture is, to him, kind of like, what? What would this mean? Why? That kind of thing. The illustrations in this are pretty incredible. So there are illustrations in every chapter, and I'll show you one because this is going to be relevant here in a second. So, The Man in the Moon. So they're all pencil drawings. This is a very famous image from that A Trip to the Moon 1902 film. And it does it all over the place, all sorts of illustrations that come about, and they are incredible. Like this is a really good artist. You have, they try and intersperse that throughout the story, telling a little bit more detail. You know, you get expressions of people, close-ups of things, illustrations of paintings that they come across, things like that, you know, most of them are that a picture is worth 1,000 words kind of thing. You can show a child something that they may not be able to visualize. So that's pretty neat. That is the reason why this is such a big book, because there are so many illustrations in this book. And so, anyway, that really adds to the story a lot. And it makes it for a very unique book. So I really like that. Historical events. So there are historical events that actually happened. For example, what happened to Mr. Mele's films. So they were not all preserved. A lot of them were destroyed because they just didn't think to preserve historical records back then. I mean, today, anything put on film, except for maybe a commercial, is saved forever. You know, the internet is forever, it seems like, right? But way back when, they recycled the material that things were filmed on, and things were lost. So there's some interesting historical details. They also have some historical events with actual photographs. So this is a train that crashed, and since he's in a train station, so this is an actual photograph of a historical event. So they have a couple of those, not very many, but a couple of those in here. So the historical events, really very interesting, very educational. So the movie A Trip to the Moon, I'll have a link down below of a free YouTube version. It's only 12 minutes long. But it's very historically relevant. If you've never seen it before, go watch it because you can be historically educated, cultural education right there. Anyway, this was really interesting because this book made my kids interested in watching that. A black and white silent film that is very, very old. It was 1902. And my kids were interested and I sat down and watched it. And that is amazing that the kids would be interested in that. So I really appreciated that about this book, that it helped my kids get some history, some culture. Finally, our main character comes across to me as autistic. You kind of have a picture of the main character there on the back of the book. He's a 12-year-old boy, and he hyperfixates. He doesn't really have good social skills. Partially it could just be attributed to his isolated, you know, he hasn't been around other kids for a long time, but he comes across as somebody who's probably more autistic than not, I have an autistic child, and this really related to how my son is. So I was looking at that going, this just strikes me as a lot of characteristics of my autistic son. So I liked the fact that neurodivergent main character, something that perhaps my son could relate to. So I did like that. He just doesn't catch social cues very well in the story. Okay, there are a handful of things that I didn't like about this book. So one is that my biggest thing on this is our main character is a thief. So think Oliver Twist, you know, orphan child who goes around stealing bread and milk and stuff like that, which is fine in a survival kind of way, but it's not, it isn't a positive thing. Like, this is not a Robin Hood-esque thing, and it's not strictly survival. Like, he sees something he wants, and he takes it. He doesn't ask permission. It doesn't cross his mind that he shouldn't do this. And there are no real consequences. There are a couple of consequences in the book, but not really. You don't get the impression that at the end of the book he has learned that stealing is wrong and that he's not going to do it anymore. You kind of get the impression he's just a kleptomaniac, and even though it doesn't mention it in the epilogue, he's probably still doing it, casually just taking other people's things. And I didn't like that. I didn't like how the stealing was portrayed in this book as you just do it. You see something you want, you take it, even if you don't need it. You just take it because you want it. And then there are no consequences to that other than people getting kind of mad at you. But he doesn't learn a lesson. And I don't like that. Okay, illustrations. For the most part, like I said, they're really good and they're relevant, but not always. Sometimes, for example, here's a series of illustrations. So the boy goes to the metro station. Then the next picture, the train is coming. Then the next picture, he gets on the train. Then he sits on the train. Then he gets off the train. Okay, as you can see, this is a whole series of illustrations that they are depicting something. But how many pages of illustrations for something that really would take 2 sentences to say? This was not a case of the picture is worth 1,000 words. Instead, it's a whole bunch of pictures worth a couple words. And there are quite a few that are like that, where it just seems like the author really likes drawing and really wanted to include drawings, but they didn't really help the story. Like if my kids were looking off in the distance and just listening instead of watching the book, and we got to the illustrations there, I could just say he got on the train, he's sitting on the train, and it wouldn't have been any big deal. They didn't miss anything if they missed those illustrations. So that's, Okay, overall though, I loved the book. My kids loved the book. There were a couple of tense moments, but not too much, that my kids didn't like the book. It had a happy ending, it was satisfying, it was educational, everything that you would want for a young adult juvenile fiction / young adult book. So 2 thumbs up. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it even for an adult just to experience this book. I mean, the artwork is amazing. I would recommend it for if you have a voracious young adult reader in your life. Probably an older teenager might, not be as interested because the characters are younger and the plot is a little bit younger. There's that age range of, 15 to 20 where, that's too childish kind of thing. But younger than that, and they'd probably really like it. Okay, so I am going to put a link to the movie in the description in case you haven't seen it. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and please join me next week.